Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever time it is, wherever you are. Welcome to Beach Walk Vlog. And today I wanted to talk about the running motion. And I wanted to talk about vertical oscillation. Vertical oscillation in the running motion. I'm going to start off by saying that the running action is down more than it is up. Okay, the running action is down more than it is up. What do I mean by that? Well, I hear a lot of times the cue for runners from coaches and physical therapists: run tall. Now, when I think of run tall, what I think of is somebody who's going up in the air, pushing up high, getting really tall in their entire body. And really, that doesn't happen when we run. We're not actually pushing way up in the air. We're not pushing up high. We're not going up very much. We're really not going up much at all. In fact, what we're doing is we're going down and then going forwards. And we can really see this by looking at the action of the tibia, the ankle, the knee, the hip. And we can see that the ankle is most of the time when we're on the ground is dorsiflexed. That means that the tibia angle is going forwards. That means that we're going to essentially be shorter than we are when we're just standing up, when we're walking, when we're standing up tall, like as if we're standing up to attention. So that's the first thing. The ankle is dorsiflexed most of the time when you're on the ground. In fact, should be dorsiflexed pretty much all the time when you're on the ground. So that tells you that from the moment you land, you're going down. So you're absorbing force, you're absorbing landing forces into the foot, the ankle, the knee, the hip. So let's go to the knee. The knee is also bent when you land. So if the knee is bent when you land and it's less than 180 degrees, that must mean that you are also shorter at the knee when you're running than when you're walking or when you're standing tall to attention. So then let's work our way to the hip. The hip is also flexed. The hip is less than 180 degrees when you land. So therefore, again, it's at a position that's flexed. That means that you're now essentially shorter at three joints: your ankle, your knee, and your hip. So this notion of run tall it's really just on the point of those three. It's completely wrong. So if we look at the vertical oscillation, we have to remember that we're going down to then go forwards. And when you push off the ground, you're probably not much, if at all, taller than when you are in just a standing position. So why are we focusing so much on driving upwards? Why are we focusing most of our workouts on jumping upwards, driving upwards? Doesn't really make much sense, does it? Because we have to go down to go forwards. And when we go down, what we're actually doing is we're rotating over the top of the foot. Now, when I talk about rotational movement, most people tune in and think that I'm talking solely about the spine rotating. But really, all of our joints rotate. All of the moving joints rotate because they're levers. They're long levers. And obviously some are longer than others, but those joints actually rotate over the top or around. The bones rotate around the joint. So every movement is rotation. So again, like this pushing upwards, where, for example, in a squat where the bar is on your shoulders and the bar is directly vertical over your center of mass, and your center of mass is directly over your ankle, that's not the position that you push off when you run. That's not the position you push off when you run. When you push off, your weight is way in front of you. Your center of mass, should I say, is way in front of your foot. The majority of your weight is way past your foot, which means that you're pushing backwards into the ground, or you're rotating over the top of your foot to then drive force forwards. So your torso rotates over the top of your of your pelvis rotates around the femur, the head of the femur. The femur rotates over the top of the tibia, and the tibia rotates over the top of the foot and ankle. And you're pushing the ground backwards to translate to forwards motion. So there's a lot of different rotations going on there. So why people are doing calf raises with a straight knee, pushing upwards, I really don't know. Because again, that doesn't happen when you run. Why people are doing loads and loads of squats, pushing a heavy weight upwards, because that's not how it happens when you run, again, doesn't make sense. Why people are doing planks to stiffen the thoracic region and protract the shoulders to bring the shoulders forwards, again, doesn't make sense. So there's so many things that in traditional training for running, that's another debate for the future. Traditional training for running. I don't really believe that many people have actually been training for running. I don't really believe that many people have been training for running at all. They've just been doing arbitrary random stuff that doesn't really make sense for anything but the arbitrary random stuff that they're doing in itself. So training for running really hasn't been a concept until the sling method, especially training for distance running, for endurance running, hasn't really been a concept until the sling method came out. Because what we do in the sling method is we talk about all of these rotations, we talk about all of these movements as they pertain to running, and that is training for running, because training is specific. Training is with a specific goal or a specific achievement in mind. So if you're doing something and saying, oh, this is training for running, but it's really not really for running, or it's just for anything, then it's not really training for running. It's just doing random arbitrary stuff. And that's what we want to get rid of, because we want stuff that's going to be specific for running, things that are going to actually be 100% beneficial and transferable and relatable, and that translate over to your running. And that's really why we talk about all these things and why we train these things. So the action of running, the vertical oscillation. So if we've established that really everything happens in running when you're actually lower, when you're actually at a shorter height than your normal standing position, all of the force absorption, the force production happens when you're slightly lower than your normal standing height. So if I'm about 5'8" on a good day, most of the action is probably going to happen when I'm at about 5'5", 5'6", a couple of inches below my normal height, my standing height. And I'm not going to go up to 6'2". I'm not going to push that high. I'm not going to push off the ground upwards so much. I actually spend very, very little time off the ground when I'm running. Because remember, I take 3 steps per second or more at a cadence of 180. I'll be taking 3 steps per second. Now think about when you jump. You're off the ground for a good amount of time. And if in running you're taking 3 steps per second or more, you can't be off the ground for very long. So therefore you're not jumping very high. It's not jumping. It's rotating over the standing foot. It's rotating around the standing leg, the stance leg. None of that's jumping, because you're not pushing upwards. Okay? Now, the running action is it's not really an eccentric muscle contraction, because remember, eccentric muscle contractions are contractions where the muscle is getting longer under load. Now that doesn't happen when you're running. It can't. Eccentric contractions are too slow. So what do we get when you're running? So the running action is isometric muscle contractions, and they're involving the muscle contracting really hard, really forcefully, which we know, and at a very rapid rate of contraction, very rapid rate of speed, right? So if the muscle is contracting at a really rapid rate of speed and yet there's still lengthening going on, we know that those tendons and the fascia stores the energy because it mechanically lengthens, and then it shortens, it snaps back like elastic. It's not elastic. We call it elastic, but it isn't made of elastic, right? So the muscle contracts to hold on, and then the tendon and the fascia mechanically lengthens and then snaps back like elastic does. And remember, that happens 3 times or more per second. Okay, so there's no way that we can have eccentric muscle contractions going on. It's isometric muscle contractions with a stretch reflex of the fascial tissue and the tendons. So this notion of, oh, we must train eccentric contractions, no. It's not eccentric muscle contractions. It's isometric, which means there is no lengthening in the muscle. So it's a very powerful muscle contraction which forces the stretch into the tendon and into the fascia. Now that is super important to understand the difference there. Okay, now people have talked in the past about, oh, my hamstrings, I must train my hamstrings eccentrically, because when my leg is out in front of me like this, my hamstring has to contract eccentrically to then pull it back. Again, no, that's not what happens. Eccentric contractions are very slow. They're slow contractions because it involves the muscle itself actually lengthening very slowly. And that doesn't happen in running because it's so fast, right? So again, what happens is, especially with the hamstrings, where we're involving 2 joints, the hip and the knee, the hamstring contracts or some of the hamstring fibers contract isometrically, which causes a stretch into the fascia and into the tendon. And then when the lower leg has been decelerated, it then starts to become accelerated backwards, so that you land on the ground on a backward traveling leg, and you don't land and then become Bambi on ice. So these are things that people are really getting wrong. They're getting grossly wrong, and they're just not understanding that movement is rotation. That means it's torque, which is why the sling method uses torque and not linear force. We're not doing bench presses, squats with weights on our shoulders or whatever. We're not using linear based force, we're using torque. And the cool thing about torque is you can increase the torque factor by increasing the lever length without increasing the load. And that's really the cool part about it, because think about doing a straight arm front raise with some dumbbells. Just take that as an example. So I'm going to just pick something up here. If I pick up this piece of wood, if I then extend that out in front of me, I have this piece of wood which weighs maybe a pound or a pound and a half, and it's on a 2 foot long lever. So that is creating 2 pounds of weight at a torque factor of 2 feet. So it's 2 pounds-feet of torque on my shoulder muscles. Now if I bring that same piece of wood into my elbow and I hold it in my elbow, it's now creating 1 pound of torque on my shoulder, because it's less distance away from the pivot point. So the same load but because it's further away from the pivot point, creates more torque. And that is the cool thing about running, is that when you speed up the running action, i.e. you go from a walking cadence to a running cadence, you don't change the load, you change the speed of the movement. And the speed of the movement will increase the torque factor because it's moving faster. Therefore, it has to be decelerated and accelerated quicker. Now, that doesn't involve more load. It doesn't involve being stronger. What it involves is creating more torque because the speed of the movement is more powerful. But it's not increasing power because the load has gone up. It's not increasing power because the weight or the resistance has gone up. It's increasing because the speed of the movement has increased. And that's very, very different. That's so very different to what traditional strength training gets us to do, which is, oh, I'm stronger, I increase the load. Yeah, but that's not what happens when you run. You don't increase the load. I don't all of a sudden become 50 pounds heavier when I start running. My limbs move faster, which means the torque factor has increased. Okay? So there's all these things that people are getting wrong with their training, which is why, you know, people get stronger and they still get injured because they're not training. You know, you say that you're I'm doing strength training for running. It's like, take the for running bit out of there, because it isn't for running. It isn't strength training for running. It's strength training in a linear fashion, which is not training for running, because running isn't about strength. It's about power. It's about torque. It's about speed. Like I said, when you start running, you don't just automatically become 50 pounds heavier, right? What you have to do is you have to be able to contract muscles faster and more rapidly, which leads to increased level of nervous system fatigue. And all of this is in the research, and I can show this research without a problem at all. If anybody wants it, just let me know. I can screenshot it and show you that this is neurologically taxing. It's not taxing particularly on the muscles because it's actually quite low force at high speed on levers, which creates high torque. Okay, so it's not really lots of strength needed, which is why when we calculate force, it's because speed is very high. Force, mass times acceleration. People tend to forget the acceleration part. It's like, oh yeah, I'm stronger. So what? You're not moving any quicker. Your running isn't getting any better. You're not getting much faster based off of that increase in force. You know, if my squat strength goes up, why doesn't my running speed double? Or my pace half? Well, because it's about torque and fitness. It's not about strength. And as I keep saying, and I keep showing all the time, that there is a distinct lack of research, or should I say no research, that shows that strength training prevents or decreases running injuries. There's no research. There's none. Now, if we've been doing strength training to prevent and decrease running injuries for what, we're in 2023 now, 40 years we've been saying this, maybe 40 years, maybe 30 years. Let's just say it's 30 years. We must do strength training to prevent injuries, but the injury rates haven't gone down. People still get injured all the time. People get injured who are doing lots of strength training. In fact, people get injured doing the strength training. So the thing that you're doing to prevent getting injured in the other thing that you do is actually making you injured, or it's injuring you. There's irony right there. So like I said, there is no research that shows that strength training treats or prevents or decreases the number of running injuries that we see. All right, so we have to start looking at this differently, and it starts really with understanding the running movement, it being a vertical oscillation with more down than up. That's That's one thing. The fact that it's not eccentric, it's not an eccentric muscle contraction that goes into every step that you take, every stride that you make. I sound like a very famous song there, don't I? It's not an eccentric muscle contraction, it's an isometric muscle contraction with a stretch of the fascia and the tendons that gives you that mechanical running economy. Okay, so if remember, eccentric muscle contractions require a lot of energy, and they also, what people seem to forget is that they actually they use less muscle fibers at a higher level of exertion. So if you're using less muscle fibers at a higher level exertion, that's not efficient, that's not economical, it's actually extremely taxing. What you want to be doing is using more muscle fibers at a less fatigue or a less exertion level, because they will use less anaerobic capacity. They'll be using an aerobic system of energy, which will then mean less CO2 and less lactate is produced, which will then actually keep you in an aerobic state. Now, when you become better at rotating around your foot and ankle, what you actually find is that you're using less energy because you're actually going down. And remember, it costs me less energy to go down than it does to go up, because I'm storing the mechanical energy when I land and I contract a muscle isometrically, and then the fascial tissue and the tendons stretch. That's mechanical. It's a mechanical storage of energy. That stretch in those tissues is mechanical, not chemical. There's no chemical reaction that goes into that stretch of the fascial tissues. And that is the key to running economy, is that getting good at storing the mechanical energy so that you can then not have to use the chemical energy, the aerobic system, to contract the muscles to push you off the ground. So understanding that eccentric isometric part of the equation, understanding that running is not about being strong, it's about rotation, it's about torque, understanding it's not about pushing off the ground upwards, so stop training that action, understanding that it's not about the calf or the gastroc being super strong, because the gastroc doesn't do that much work to lift the heel off the ground because the knee is bent. That means the soleus muscle must be the one that is active much more than the gastroc. Okay, so if you're training your calves with a straight leg to lift you up, i.e. doing calf raises, and you've got an Achilles tendon issue, you've just found out why you've still got the Achilles tendon issue and why it's not getting better when you strength train your gastrocnemius muscles in a straight leg heel raise. So doing heel raises is not the solution to that. Okay, so yeah, I'm going to leave that there. 24 minutes, that's a good amount of time that I think I want to try and cap these beach walk blogs at this amount of time. I know sometimes I get a bit passionate and go off on a tangent or whatever, but I'm trying to kind of get this information across to people so that you can really understand where you're going wrong and what you need to do to stop these overuse injuries and stop this waste of time traditional strength arbitrary exercising. I'm not going to call it strength training anymore, because it's not training, it's not specific, it's not for running. The sling method is where it's at, proving this all the time. The results that I'm getting with it and the results that people are sharing and displaying with it are just yeah, fantastic. I strongly suggest that every runner starts using the sling method as their training, because it is training for running and the running movement, and it is training for every human, and it will make you stronger, just won't do it in the same way as traditional linear strength training. Have a great rest of your day. Thanks for listening, and don't forget to share and subscribe, and share it with your injured runner friends so that they can find a better way that's going to help them to a long-term solution rather than a band-aid fix, because we don't do band-aid fixes, we do long-term solutions. Take care. Bye bye.